let's get to the review. The review is Caylus 1303. You know what? I don't know if we said that at the head. I don't know if we mentioned what we'll be reviewing this week.
Well, people will read that before
Yes.
they listen to the episode, so we don't have to repeat what they already know.
That's hilarious. It is a 2019 release. The designer is William Adia. And
Why are we reviewing 2019 games in 2020, Tom? This is already way too old for us to talk about.
It's horrible. Well, I think it has to do with a couple things. First of all, a lot of 2019 games get released at Essen, and then they only have a couple months to get them to the United States, and lots of times they don't even come in until 2020.
We waited for the Leap episode to talk about this game, everyone listening.
Well, I think the other thing is that with what's going on in China right now, we may have a dearth of games in the later half of this year. We may need to be reviewing more 2019 and earlier releases because there might be a somewhat of a lull in the usual game pipeline this year, as we'll see.
Or maybe we'll just fly to China to play them at the factory.
I will buy you a ticket tomorrow. The designer is William Adia. The artist is Andrew Bosley. The publisher is Space Cowboys. Dimitri, will you tell us what the Caylus 1303 is about? First of all, we should acknowledge that it is a remake, essentially, or a variant of one of the most popular Euro games of all time, a game that is widely considered to be one of the first worker placement games, and probably the most influential first worker placement game of those. Bus
it
being one of the other
predates Agricola, I think, by 3 years, the original version. I have a very personal relationship to this game because I had my first table flip when we played Caylus. I think you remember it well.
It's a mean game.
It's a mean game. Someone was very mean to me. Someone reneged on a deal we had made to move the horsey figure. What's the horsey figure called? I forget.
It's not a horsey figure in that game. You're talking about the provost.
The provost.
Yes.
And cost me, and I basically said, I'm not playing this anymore, and I'm leaving. I apologize for that. 13 years later now?
It wasn't me, was it?
It wasn't you.
No.
We're not going to say who it was, but a host of this podcast. Not Maddie. So I played the old Caylus. I played the new Caylus. I think my feelings aside.
Would you just tell us what it's about first? There are some people that have never played either Caylus, so just
Sure.
sort of an overview.
It is a shopping and spending game. And it's a building game. You place your workers. They give you resources for that placement along a bunch of buildings on a road where you can trade resources. And then you can build some of those buildings, or you can build a castle.
Yes. Okay. So shopping game might throw people the wrong way. This is set in 1303. The original one was set in 1289. And we are trying to build a castle in the French region, or the French town of Caylus. And as would happen back in those days, in order to build a castle, you kind of have to build a town first. You are bringing in artisans, you're bringing in workers, you're bringing in people that will do all these things. They have to live there. So you're building houses for them. You're building blacksmiths.
Well, they can also live in the camp.
Yes, but not for a blacksmith. You're going to need a smithy. You're going to need
These are places
carpentry
where they
shops and
actually
things like that.
do the
Yes,
job. They
exactly.
actually manufacture the stuff.
So the game of both Cayluses, because they're similar, is that you are building this town, and as you're building this town, you're getting the resources necessary to build the castle. 1303 takes place after a war has happened, and the castle essentially needs to be rebuilt, and that's just the idea of that. But that's what the game is. The game is putting your guy in various buildings, your people in various buildings, getting the resources from those buildings, and then using those resources to build more buildings.
Or the castle.
Upgrade your buildings.
The buildings.
Or build a castle, exactly.
You also can build monuments.
Indeed, you can.
Just for points. And another thing you can build, in addition to buildings that will give you resources, are places for your workers to stay. to sleep over, so they don't have to return to the camp. And that's a way to supplement your workers, because your workers, all the workers, go to the camp to sleep over, and only a few of them come back. And that is part of the economy and managing your workers that I really enjoy. It seems to me very thematic, and there's some complex decisions involved. Do I have the actions to do right now, or should I save my workers for the next round where they can be used in a more efficient and interesting way?
Yes. In the original Caylus, there was money and there were your workers. Your workers would go out, and occasionally the things that the workers would do would cost you money, and you would have to pay that money. Now it is all just workers. If something costs you, you have to expend one of your workers. So instead of in the original game where you have 3, 4, 5 workers, here you have 8, 10 workers at a given time. Sometimes I think you start with 6, except in the 5-player game where you start with 10.
And there are also variable powers that let you grab more.
Exactly right. So they basically turned a 2-unit economy into a 1-unit economy, which is very interesting. It is a very clever idea in terms of taking the complexity of the game down without reducing the decision space for that, for the most part.
In my opinion, that was a complete success. I don't miss the not having money in the game at all.
Gotcha.
Let's talk about how you play it.
Excellent. How do you play it? Well, there will be a start player of the round. It is going to go in a clockwise fashion, which is different than the original Caylus. And that person is going to take one of their workers, and they're going to be able to put it out on one of the buildings on the road. There are 4, I believe, permanent spots on the board now.
Before the bridge.
Yeah,
they're already
bridge.
built, and
correct.
they cannot be affected
And then after
by
that,
the provost.
Exactly. And then after that, there are starting buildings. There are the buildings that will start out the game. There are several of those.
Do they change, Tom?
No, they don't change, I don't believe. I think the order in which they are along the road changes.
We lay them out.
Correct. In which the order in which they're
and
laid out.
And the order is important for the reason that we'll discuss later.
Exactly. And when you place a worker out, you're getting whatever that later on in the round, you will potentially get what that building produces. So if you go to the farm, you will get a food cube. If you go to
a turkey leg.
Yeah, if you go to the forest, if you go to the forestry or the lumber yard or whatever, you're going to get a wood, and so on and so forth. You're going to get one thing for each of those.
Later on, you can get cloth and gold.
Exactly right.
Those are the resources in the game.
And you can build buildings. There are spaces you can go. There are buildings that you can go onto, put your guy onto, and that will allow you, when your turn comes, to build a building farther down that road. The road snakes all the way up or down. One game it expands up, and one game you expand down. That is how you put out new buildings into the game.
Tom,
and the new
what
buildings
are the 2 reasons that you might want to build a new building from wood or stone or cloth? How do you get points from that when you build a building?
Tell me, Dimitri, how do you get points from that?
Well, in 2 ways. First of all, you're contributing new, more efficient ways to get new resources into the game. And also, anytime that somebody else places a worker in that building, you get victory points.
Cha-ching.
And the beauty of those victory points is you cannot spend victory points in this game, and no one can take victory points away from you. So unlike resources that you may lose or convert into something else, a victory point is like a treasury bond.
Yeah, it's banked.
It's banked.
It is
Absolutely.
banked points. There is one other place you can put a worker, though, and that is up at the castle. Up at the castle, there are spaces enough for each person to place one worker. And when you place a worker there, what you are doing is you're saying, I am going to help build this castle. And the way you build a castle is by contributing a packet.
Yes, and the packet, first of all, you have food, because you do have to feed people who are working on the castle. And then you have to give 3 resources, or 4, I forget.
No, it's food plus 2.
Food plus 2. Oh, it's even easier. Those can be wood, they can be stone, they can be cloth, they can be gold. And not only do you get the pride of building the castle, you get rewarded for that.
The only thing is that they have to be different resources. All of the resources have to be different for
Unless you have a variable power.
Which we should get into right now. As something new in this game, as opposed to the original, is there are character cards that will be chosen at the beginning of the game in reverse turn order. And then they will be the special powers that you have. Not for the whole game, though. Why not, Dimitri?
Because when you go to the castle and you contribute packets, you will get victory points. And you will get a choice of getting an additional reward, which is variable in the castle, if you contribute the most packets. And your other choice is to get a variable power, one of those assistants, or if you forgo the reward, you can steal one of those variable powers from another player. So there are, I think, 8 variable powers in the game, and sometimes you can collect them. You can collect up to 2, 3, 4 variable powers, sometimes by being a bad guy and taking them from me.
When you build buildings, the buildings that you build, I think Dimitri hinted at this, are better than the start buildings. Instead of generating 1 cube, they'll generate 2 cubes. Later on, the stone buildings will come out, and those generate potentially 3 cubes or do better and better things.
I want to point out that the old Caylus had cubes. This new one has interesting carvings. Turkey legs.
Sure.
Yes. For me, that makes a lot of a difference. I like to see what I have.
Yeah, they're still cubes. They're just non-square cubes. Let's not get too far away. You were talking about the rewards, which are favors. How does favors work in this game? We understand that you can not take a favor in order to grab one of the special character powers, including grabbing it away from a competitor. But how does the favors work in this game?
There are 9 favors. I think they're randomly distributed on cards, and you get a choice of first 3 favors in the first 3 rounds, the first 6 favors in the second 3 rounds, and the first 9 favors in the last 3 rounds. And there are 9 rounds to the game, so you know when it's over.
Yes, indeed. The game is a fixed length, which is different than the original game. It is only 9 rounds long. I think that gives people a pretty good idea of the way the game plays.
Let's talk about the provost, though. That's an important part.
Of course. How do we not talk about the provost yet? So here's the thing. Here's where the game gets doubly mean. We already talked about one take that mechanism, which is if
taking
you get
the variable powers away from a player.
Precisely right. But you can also be really mean. There is a provost character. The provost character camps out at the farthest space on the road.
Just behind the last constructed building.
Exactly. He sits there, and his job is to make sure that people aren't building too much stuff, that they're focused on building that castle. That's the idea, that they're not building too much of the town and that they're focused on building that castle. So wherever the provost ends at the end of the round, any buildings that are constructed past the provost on the road
are not licensed, can't open for business. And guess who gets to move the provost?
Everybody.
Everybody can move the provost by spending their workers. And by the way, remember that the new buildings that are built past the provost are better and more efficient and have much more interesting resources and more interesting ways to spend the resources, and also more interesting ways for you who built the building to get victory points for somebody else to use it. So there are people who want to move the provost as far down the road as possible so they can get those resources. People who are trying to catch up, or people who just build interesting buildings, or people who want those resources. And other people, the evil people, want to hold the provost back and maybe even move the provost behind where they started out, so others won't get those resources and they'll hold on to their lead.
Exactly right. Essentially, it is a situation in which the best buildings are those at the far end of the buildings, right? Because those are the ones that are bigger and better and give you more resources. But those are also the ones that are at great risk for the provost ruining your day and causing you to spend a guy that is ill-advised, let's say that. In practice, what ends up happening is I get the sense that DMITRY is winning the game. So I talk to all my other guys and I say, hey, how about we all pitch in a person or two in order to move the provost to the other way, because each person can move the provost up to 3 spaces. And we realize that, well, DMITRY is winning the game and he's got 2 guys on very important buildings down there at the end. But if DMITRY's smart, he won't put 2 guys down there. He'll put 1 guy down there, and he'll make sure that some other player has a guy right next to that guy, so that maybe you both have an interest in saving your skins and making sure that nobody gets messed up too much.
I want to mention a couple of other sources of pressure in the game. The earlier buildings that are put out at the beginning of the game ultimately get converted away from their original use to houses for the workers or to monuments by the players. So as the provost limits the game on the far side of the road, on the near side of the road, buildings are being taken away.
Exactly.
So the buildings that are built later gain in importance because after a while, they're the only buildings that you can go to.
Yes, we're being pushed forward essentially by the mechanisms of the game.
And the other source of pressure is actually turn order. Once somebody says, I'm done placing my workers, everybody else, unless you have a variable power, now has to place 2 workers in every building rather than 1. Because basically
Sacrifice a worker in order to place a worker, essentially.
Once somebody quits and says, I'm done for the night, everybody else pretty much works at 50% effort. That makes thematic sense.
I just want to be clear about one thing about the royal favors. There are only 3 royal favors in any game that you can take. In the first 3 rounds, you can only take the first royal favor, which is a building tile.
Sorry about that.
It's okay,
Yes.
no problem. Which is a building tile that was not placed out in the game. Rounds 4, 5, and 6, there will be a second benefit, and rounds 7 through 9, there'll be a third benefit. So throughout the game, you're going to have at first only 1 choice for royal favor, then 2 choices, then 3 choices. But that's the extent of it. That's the extent of the choices for royal favors. DMITRY, let's get into it. What do you think? First of all, what do you think about the game just as it stands? Imagine that you have never played original Caylus, and then we'll talk about the comparison.
It plays in 90 minutes, and it has rich complexity in the decision choices, very intuitive rules, excellently balanced variable powers. For me, this is a game that feels beautifully streamlined and maximized for play. It doesn't have any chrome. It doesn't have anything extra detracting from it. And it might be a little too focused for some people, but I like that. This is a 90-minute version of a worker placement game, which is much more rich than, for, say, Bus. But I can't think of another worker placement game that plays this fast, and it's a fast 90 minutes. We don't have decision paralysis here. I think of worker placement games, they play in 3 hours. They play a little less, a little more. As a streamlined, fast-paced experience, you can tell this has been play tested and really, really polished.
It is elegant. It's an elegant game. It is more elegant than the original, which, listen, when you're going from 2005 to 2020, I would hope that it would be more elegant, but it definitely shows this is a game that the moment you start learning the rules to it, you know you're in safe hands. This is pros. Pros are doing their work here, and you're along for the ride.
This is not the beta version.
No, by no means, by no means. It is faster to learn and faster to play than the original by a solid margin. I believe that Caylus, the original, you would play in probably 2.5 hours. This game you play in about 1.5 hours. So you shaved about an hour off of the playtime, which is quite significant. That is a big deal.
And not just the playtime itself, but the play is faster. The playtime hasn't been shaved because you're making half the decisions. The playtime has been shaved because you're making just as many decisions, but at a rate that's much quicker.
No, I don't agree with that. I think that there are definitely more decisions that are happening in original Caylus than there are in this game. The game is truncated. This game has only 9 rounds. A game of original Caylus is going to go on considerably longer than that.
Okay.
And I also think that the decision is an interesting word you use, because decisions does not equal turns, right? Decisions equals hard turns.
Agreed.
And
like choices, the amounts of choices that you have, the branches of your decision tree have been pruned.
So
You're right about that.
So I do agree that one of the reasons this game is shorter is there are fewer hard choices. But isn't that almost always the toss up, the decision making process that you have to go through? I would say this game is less fiddly by taking out the
money.
Taking out money for sure, but also by taking out the favor track. There was a favor scoring mechanism by taking out the different stages of building the castle, which were in the original. They've stripped a bunch down, and they've made some very strong choices to make each part of the game as simple and as elegant as they could, which is really cool. And this game is more different game to game. It's more variable. The player powers make the game play very differently from game to game. The fact that the 3 favors that are going to be out each game, are going to give each game a very different complexity and a very different feel. And the fact that first favor that goes out on that player board is a building that the game is kind of designed to have out in the village, and now it's not out there in the village anymore. That can lead to some very significant different play. I think that's all a really, really good thing.
It's another push to get you to contribute to the castle, which works thematically.
Potentially, yes.
That there would be something that you might want to get, and the only way of getting it is from the king. For me, I see the DNA of this game in a lot of others. I think Teotihuacan has a lot of these mechanisms of having buildings where you place workers and you get resources to contribute to the building of a central pyramid in Teotihuacan case. I think Great Western Trail has a lot of the DNA of Caylus in terms of you get to build buildings along a trail that other people can visit, that actually only your workers can visit. A lot of the mechanisms that were pioneered in Caylus were developed very well in recent games. And I think that what the Caylus designers decided to do as a response is to say, okay, Teotihuacan does the levels of the pyramid, does the levels of the central building much better than everybody else. Let's just get rid of that element and focus on the central game. And to me, that's a very good way to go. Because if you're looking for a 90-minute game of this type, I can't think of a better example.
There you go.
To play Teotihuacan, 2.5 hours. To play Great Western Trail, that's 3. This is a solid 90-minute Euro that I think is also a very good introduction for the medium-weight Euro.
And it gives the Caylus feel. It does. It gives the Caylus feel. It's not Caylus, but it feels like Caylus. And let's also say one last thing. It is far prettier. I mean, back in 2005, Caylus was not an ugly game. It was a good-looking game. But things have changed, and this game is beautiful. It's a really well-designed, nice-looking.
It's a pleasure to play, and it's not just beautiful; it's incredibly clear.
Okay.
You can, at a glance, see what the building is designed to do.
Do you have any cons? Do you have any negatives that you want to share?
The cons are, if you're looking for a much more sprawling, complex experience, you may think this is a little basic. There are there are reasons to prefer Teotihuacan. There are reasons to prefer Great Western Trail. There are reasons to prefer Le Havre. To mention off the top of my head 3 games that share a lot of the DNA with this one. But if you're looking for balance and speed and enjoyment and 90 minutes of play, this can't be beat.
Well, let's talk about the weight. The Caylus 1303 has a current weight on BGG of 2.93, and original recipe, is a weight of 3.81, so almost a full point difference, which is quite significant, which for me comes down to a lot of my cons to the game are about that, are about how much have we sacrificed for what is definitely faster to learn and play, less fiddly, more variable.
Recognizably the same at a full point of difficulty less is a remarkable achievement. The question is, really, for me, is if you want to play the original Caylus, aren't you better off playing Teotihuacan? Aren't you better off playing Great Western Trail?
I don't necessarily think so. I think Caylus still holds up very, very well. Listen, here are the cons for me. In the original Caylus, turn order was a big deal, and there was a building in which you could sacrifice one of your people in order to change turn order, and that decision was meaty and was always meaningful. And not only that, but this game has left-right binding now. Left-right binding means
where you sit.
That's
in
right.
order.
That's right. Whoever the start player is, the person sitting to their left is in a great position because they get to go second for free, and the person on their right gets to go fourth or fifth. This game plays 5 players. Left-right binding becomes a much bigger deal when you play with 5 players. That is a problem in this game. That is a problem. It's not going to be a problem for everybody, but for people that are into Caylus and what it is, especially since the workers are the currency of the game, there are strategies where you can play a low worker game. There are strategies where you play a game in which your strategy is to get a ton of workers, and both of them can win the game. The problem is that if I am sitting to the right of a person playing a low worker strategy, they are almost always going to be the first person to pass. I am almost always going to be the 5th player.
Unless you get a variable power, where you can place 1 worker instead of 2, and that will help you.
If that's even in the game.
It may not be, but every time I played it, it has been. Yes.
But then once again, you're forced to grab that. And by the way, if somebody's playing a low worker strategy, you grab that, somebody else's good chance they're going to steal that from you. And now all of a sudden you're spending and wasting actions, wasting favors in order to circumvent something that shouldn't be there. I think that there's a very simple variant to this game in which the order of the passing becomes the new turn order.
Sure.
And then you don't have the left-right binding issue. This game, there are 9 rounds in this game. There are 9 rounds in this game. In the original Caylus, it was one of the first games in which you could seriously affect how quick or how slow the game goes. When we think of Alexander Pfister with Great Western Trail and Maracaibo, one of his main keys to his design was he was trying to make a game in which players could make decisions to change the tempo and change the pace of the game.
But in this Caylus, there is a fighting for the length of a turn. Not maybe how many turns we play, but you can choose to end your turn early and cost the extra player for every
but that's not different
placement.
than that isn't different than the original Caylus. The original
I agree,
Caylus has
but
both.
it retained.
Sure.
But I don't think it's fair to say that this game has no way of affecting length.
I don't really agree with that. I think there are lots of games in which Gaia project, all those sort of things. You can keep playing after other people have passed. That's not really the same as a mechanism in which you can make the game last extra turns, whole turns.
Okay.
I think that's
Sure.
a significant difference there. The castle used to be something where you were forced to go to the castle, and the castle was built in 3 parts. And when that part was about to be finished, we were going to do a castle scoring. And if you had the most pieces in the castle at that point, if you had built the most of the castle at that point, you're going to get a benefit. You're going to get a favor or multiple favors. If you didn't put anything into the castle, you're getting penalized. This game doesn't have that anymore, and that's a missing element for me personally.
Oh, I totally get it. And like there are many games that have taken that mechanism and exploited it, like Trois, for example, where you have to have contributions or else you lose points.
Yep.
And for me, Caylus pioneered that mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
but there are better versions of this mechanism elsewhere. Tom, let me ask you. I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
I would always rather play a shorter, simpler game.
Okay,
but let me ask you.
I'm not quite done yet, though.
Oh, sure.
So
go
let
ahead.
me get to my last point, which is this game is meaner than Caylus. This game is meaner than the original Caylus. The Provost is a very polarizing mechanism in a game. It is one of the meanest take that mechanisms in a Euro game, has been for decades, and they kept that in, and I love that William kept that in. I think that's fantastic. But in addition, he now has character cards that each person has, and they can be taken away from you.
Yeah.
So he has doubled down on the take that.
But remember, I table flipped in the original Caylus.
This is what I'm saying.
So let me ask you this. Since we agree on what the game is, when would you play the original and when would you play the new version? I think that will give me a great way of like thinking about it.
It comes down to my calculus, which is this, which is, would you rather play a medium weight game that takes 90 minutes, or would you rather play a medium heavy game that takes 2.5 hours? So for one extra hour, I get a full point of complexity. That's the question. I love that this game exists. I think it's important that this game exists. This is a good game. I am in no way, shape, or form saying that this is a bad game. This is an excellent game. This belongs on a lot of people's shelves. It doesn't belong on everybody's shelf. It depends on what your tastes are. If you want if medium weight is your jam, get Caylus. It's going to be a very interesting play for you. My worry is that people that want a 90-minute medium experience, this might have a little more take that than they're looking for. It might be a little more painful and a little more punishing than a medium weight Euro gamer wants to have.
Sure,
it
but
fits much better. It fits. Sorry, just to finish. It fits much better in the heavy, nearly a 4.0 rating. With those games, you kind of expect a bloody nose occasionally.
But a counter argument is, okay, I'm going to get a bloody nose, but at least it'll be over in 90 minutes. As opposed to getting a bloody nose and having to breathe and wheeze and blow blood bubbles through it for 3 hours.
But it's a less mean game, and it's longer. It's a more mean game. The shorter one is the more mean game.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. Bus is an extremely mean game that plays in 60 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
For me, meaner games, Estates is an exceptionally mean game that plays in 45 minutes. The meaner for me is better at shorter lengths, and the more relaxed should be at longer, because I don't want to suffer as long.
Gotcha. I think that's about all we can say. Caylus is a great game. It really, really is. Caylus 1303 is also a great game. They're two different flavors, and it depends on your play style and the way you play these games. But if you like the original Caylus and wouldn't mind something that's a little bit shorter and a little bit less complex, highly check it out. It is a brilliant, brilliant design.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.